Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Manor College's Ukraine Dialogue Program. Thank you for joining us today. We are America's only accredited institution of higher education, founded by the Ukrainian Sisters of St. Basil the Great, and remaining true to our Ukrainian heritage. Unique as a college in the United States, we proudly say, Slava Ukraine. We thank our Board of Trustees Chairman, Dennis McGrath, Manor's Ukrainian Community Committee of the Board of Trustees, chaired by Leonard Mazur, and we thank you, all of you, for supporting our mission, our heritage, our programs, especially today's. Let's also take a moment to thank Roman Petic, Chairman Emeritus of the Ukrainian Self-Reliance Federal Credit Union Board, and Anatoly Murha, it's right over here on my left, its president. Both have been instrumental to tonight's program, as they have been from the beginning. UKRFCU remains our lead and presenting sponsor, providing new opportunities for the members of the credit union. So Roman, may I ask you to please share some remarks on behalf of the credit union?
Thank you, John. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Ukrainian Self-Reliance Federal Credit Union and its more than 15,000 member account holders, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the spring 2024 session of Manor College's Ukraine Dialogues. My name is Roman Petic, and I am honored to serve on UKRFCU's Board of Directors. It has been our credit union's privilege for close to 10 years to partner with Manor College in making these programs possible, and we are pleased that you are able to join us today. As UKRFCU expanded services to encompass more and more of the Mid-Atlantic region, we are pleased that tonight's program is being offered in a hybrid format that allows audiences from areas that would not normally draw physical participants the opportunity to hear from our excellent panelists. Our credit union's financial support helps make the dialogue series possible. But in reality, we are much more than a financial sponsor. UKRFCU approaches these events with the same passion and commitment that we bring to all of our work on behalf of the community. With the war, that commitment has been especially evident in our work on behalf of Ukrainians, both here and in Ukraine. To better serve our recent arrivals, we have fundamentally restructured many of our business models, and we have been able to enroll more than 2,000 new members from that community. And we are now starting our third year of working with Manor College, the Ukrainian Educational and Cultural Center, and other organizations to fund high-quality ESL classes in our region for Ukrainian refugees. What was initially an emergency response has sadly become a part of our regular order of business. And as we learn to live with the consequences of Russia's genocidal war in Ukraine. In the dialogue series, we and Manor College are committed to bringing you speakers who offer knowledgeable and in-depth information about issues affecting Ukraine. Our panel today is uniquely qualified for that role, having served their governments at the highest levels, both in Washington and in Kyiv. Dr. Perry will be introducing our distinguished panelists shortly, but before I ask him to do so, I wanted to briefly mention an upcoming event that our credit union is also proud to support as a sponsor. I am referring to Panelist, the annual fundraiser for the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, known as UKU. It's coming up on Saturday, May 11th. Panelist, and it's an unusual word, but it's a Ukrainian word that refers to the act of joining with neighbors to build bridges based on shared interests. Combines elements of a folk fair featuring food and entertainment with serious discussion of the issues affecting Ukraine and of UKU's work promoting Western values among Ukrainian youth through its diverse academic programs. The event takes place on Saturday, May 11th, beginning at 5 p.m. at St. Michael the Archangel's beautiful facility just down the street from Manor College's campus. We hope you can join our credit union leaders and the community at large in helping UKU rebuild a Ukraine centered on Christian Western values. Dr. Perry.
Thank you very much, Roman. At Manor College, we're grateful for our collaborations, especially with UKRFCU, and those that help us to offer more than 30 associates, bachelor's, and associates and certificate programs. We provide our students with excellent academic and transformative opportunities that enable them to fully develop as individuals. An education at Manor leads to an understanding of scientific, humanistic, and ethical principles so that our students form a global vision. Today is Manor College's, and I can't believe that I'm saying this, it is our 16th Ukrainian Dialogue Series program, and it's formally titled Diplomacy in War, Roles and Functions of an Ambassador. Our chaplain here at Manor, Father John Trapita, has written us a prayer for Ukraine to start us off. Loving God, we pray for the people of Ukraine, for all those suffering or afraid, that you will be close to them and protect them. We pray for our world leaders, for compassion, strength, and wisdom to guide their choices. We pray for the world that in this moment of crisis, we may reach out in solidarity to our brothers and sisters in need. May we walk in your ways so that peace and justice become a reality for the people of Ukraine and for all the world. Amen. Now let me please introduce our speakers. We are blessed with some amazing speakers who are on with us today out of their pure, gracious kindness. Once I introduce our speakers, I'll introduce our moderator, and then he will get our conversation started. We welcome Ambassador of Ukraine to the United States, Permanent Observer of Ukraine to the Organization of American States, and Ambassador of Ukraine to Antigua and Barbuda, Oksana Markarova. Before she arrived in DC I guess 4 years ago, April 2021, she served in Ukraine's Ministry of Finance in 2015 through 2020 as First Deputy Minister and Government Commissioner on Investments, and since 2018 as a Minister of Finance. During her time at the ministry, she was engaged in more endeavors than I can possibly share here to stay brief about. They include, but they're not limited to, co-authoring Ukraine's macroeconomic revival program, which had tremendous success in improving Ukraine's GDP. Prior to her career in public service, Ambassador Markarova spent 17 years working in the private equity and financial advisory world, having leadership roles in ITT Investment Group, Western NIS Enterprise Fund, Chemonics, and the World Bank, and she founded Archidata startup electronic archive company in between her service positions in 2020. Ambassador Markarova serves on several boards, including Ukraine House DC Foundation, Kyiv Mohyla Academy, and the Ukrainian Development Foundation. You know, she's also very involved with UKU.
Yes, she is.
She holds a BS and MS degree in environmental science from Kyiv Mohyla Academy and an MPA in public finance from Indiana University. So we welcome Ambassador Markarova. Colonel Robert D'Souza has nearly 40 years of experience in the government and legal sectors. Prior to joining Eckert Siemens, he served as state director for U.S. Senator Patrick Toomey for 12 years, during which time he oversaw 7 regional offices, managed state staff, supervised the selection of U.S. district judges, and effectively was the eyes, ears, and voice of Senator Toomey in Pennsylvania when the senator was serving in D.C. An Iraq War veteran, Bob also served in the Pennsylvania Army National Guard for 28 years. In the Guard, he held numerous positions of leadership, including as state judge advocate. His previous roles include serving as the chief counsel to the Pennsylvania Department of State and as Inspector General of the Commonwealth. He served as chief executive officer of the Vartan Group, a leader in building and land development in central Pennsylvania, and as general counsel for wealth management firm R.E. Harper Associates, among others. Bob earned his BA from Bucknell University, his JD from Dickinson, where he was on the law review, and an MSS, which is a master's in a master's of science in strategic studies at the United States Army War College. He is currently the board secretary of Manor College's Board of Trustees. We welcome Bob.
Thank you.
Our moderator this afternoon is Ambassador Roman Popodyuk, former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, a retired member of the Career Senior Foreign Service. Roman has more than 30 years of experience in the areas of national security, political risk analysis, communication strategy, and energy policy, including serving on the National Security Councils of Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. With his vast experience and contacts that span the globe, Roman brings a unique insight into international political and business matters. Ambassador Popodyuk served for 13 years as the executive director of the George Bush Presidential Library Foundation at Texas A&M. He served as international affairs advisor and senior civilian on the staff of the commandant of the Industrial College of the Armed Forces at Fort McNair. And prior to serving in that capacity, he spent 2 years as a member of the faculty of the School of Area Studies at the State Department's Foreign Service Institute. From 1989 to 1992, which, Ambassador, it was about when I was in high school, Roman served as Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy Secretary for Foreign Affairs under President George H.W. Bush, a position he also held toward the end of President Ronald Reagan's administration. Roman has written about and is frequently interviewed on issues relating to U.S.-Ukraine relations, the situation in Ukraine, and other national security and global relations issues. In 2006, he served as an observer of the parliamentary election in Ukraine, and he's a senior advisor to the U.S.-Ukraine Business Council. He's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. I have more recently dubbed him the permanent moderator for Manor College's Ukraine Dialogue Program. So let's please welcome him and our guest speakers and invite Ambassador Popodyuk to help us to begin the dialogue. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, John, for that kind introduction of myself as well as the panelists. Good evening, John. Good evening, Roman. It's good to see both of you. And special greetings and welcome to our viewers, both those who are watching online as well as those who are in attendance over at Manor College. I think we have a very important discussion coming up here with Ambassador Makarova and Bob D'Souza. The topic for tonight, of course, is the role of diplomacy and specifically the role of an ambassador during wartime. Let me just start off by saying that the role of an ambassador is very simple. The role of ambassador is to represent his or her country's views to the host government and to represent the host government's views to his or her government. But that, having said that, there are a lot of intricacies, as I'm sure Oksana will agree, that go under that simple statement. In times of war, these obviously get very much magnified. In times of war, in terms of the diplomatic relationship, there are areas that the ambassador really has to focus on. First focus, of course, is making sure that the host government supports his or her country in a conflict. And this involves not only military support, but also diplomatic support around the world, as well as financial support as necessary for the government. So that's very important. The other important feature of a role of ambassador during conflict is to stave off any propaganda that comes forth in terms of what the conflict is all about. And we've seen this during the course of the war that Russia is waging against Ukraine, the type of propaganda that the Russian media as well as the Russian government has been putting out against Ukraine in terms of what the conflict is about. and trying to undermine the relationship that Ukraine enjoys with its Western supporters. Another thing that you have to take a look at is also that the ambassador's function and the embassy's function is to relay information about the military situation on the ground to the host government and to the host government audience. So these are very important features that an ambassador has to undertake. In this particular conflict, though, there are two special roles I think that the ambassador is undertaking. I don't want to put her on the hot seat on this, but I think she'll agree with this. One of the things that people have to keep in mind is the post-war environment. And already people are talking about the need for reconstruction of Ukraine. For example, the World Bank and the Ukrainian government estimate it'll be about $486 billion that'll be necessary over a 10-year period to rebuild Ukraine. And that's on the conservative side, quite frankly, I think. And give you an example, as a subset of that, I believe it's something like $37 billion is necessary to redo the agricultural soils of Ukraine because of the great contamination that has taken place as a result of the mining as well as through the bombings. But so I think the ambassador is probably very much engaged in terms of reaching out to the American business community as well as the U.S. government in terms of starting to lay the structure for post-war reconstruction efforts in Ukraine. So that's a very important role that an ambassador and the embassy are playing. I think another important role is the nature of the conflict itself. This is a genocidal war against Ukraine by the Russians. They're out to exterminate the Ukrainian, identity. You saw that in Putin's statements of about 2 or 3 years ago when he did the famous article. I think it was in July of 21, where he said a Ukrainian nation never existed and a Ukrainian territory never existed. There's no such thing as Ukrainian people. So it is a genocidal conflict. And if you look at how the bombing takes place against educational institutions, against historical monuments, this is an effort to wipe out the Ukrainian identity. And in this situation, the issue of war crimes arises. Everyone remembers the early days of the war with Bucha. So there's an element that the ambassador and the embassy are probably playing in terms of working with the U.S. government to identify potential war crimes elements against the Russian government and the Russian military. So, and we have already seen that the International Court, Criminal Court, has already issued a warrant for Putin's arrest, given his role in forcibly taking Ukrainian children to Russia. So these are elements that an ambassador has to play with, that has to deal with, and that an embassy has to deal with. So tonight, I think we'll have a feel of how the embassy is dealing with these issues, as well as others that I may not have mentioned. And I think Bob will give us an insight probably from the legal side on how a lot of these things are playing out. So without further ado, I'd like to turn to our panelists. We'll start off with Ambassador Makarova. Oksana, it's good to see you again. I wish you all the best. Congratulations on the aid package having passed through Congress. And we're delighted, and I think I speak for all the American people, we're delighted to see that aid is flowing to Ukraine, and Ukraine will be in a better position now. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to speak today with Manor College. And every time we get together, I feel like it's a group of friends and family getting together. So great to see you, President, but also Roman and Self-Reliance. Thank you for everything that Self-Reliance does, not only for in this wonderful partnership with Manor College, but in general supporting so many Ukrainian initiatives and Hromada and getting together every time that Ukrainians or Americans for that matter need you to help. But also great to be in such a distinguished panel. Ambassador, you always have been such an inspiration to so many diplomats. And Colin of D'Souza, also look forward to your comments. First of all, I mean, I think when we talk about diplomacy, and thank you, Ambassador, for outlining so clearly what ambassadors usually do and what we have to do. And it sounds, on the one hand, as this is really simple what ambassadors have to do, but it's very difficult to do it even during the peaceful times, because essentially you have to be a captain of your embassy outside of your country and represent your country in every aspect. So whether it's economic or political or discussions, strategic discussions or strategic partnership discussions in case with the US, or it's about culture and history, and you have to do it all. And of course, you have the team to do it, but the team is never big enough, even for countries like the US, and the teams are definitely very small for a country like Ukraine, and then the tasks are still huge. But of course, you know, the wartime diplomacy is completely different. And I started working as ambassador in 2021. And of course, Russia attacked us 10 years ago in 2014. So it wasn't completely peace, but it wasn't a full-fledged war. And I had approximately a year of working as an ambassador before Russia attacked us in February 2022. And then now full 2 years, a little bit more, of working during the wartime. Just recently, our foreign minister, Kuleba, had a forum in Kiev devoted to it. It was the first wartime diplomacy summit, because this issue of what is it that diplomats should do during the wartime and how we achieved successes during this time is really something that we all can learn from, and also see how to sustain this, how to sustain the effort. It's not only a question for the brave defenders on the battlefield, but also for everyone, all Ukrainians who are fighting in this, and our diplomatic forces is an inseparable part of the effort. Now, the foundations of a different style of war diplomacy, and clearly Ukraine moved away during the past 2 years from a traditional peaceful diplomacy, have been laid out by the president. President Zelensky, at the very first days of war, and you all have seen him with his phone talking to the world directly, saying some of the famous phrases now, like I need an ammo, not a ride, or something like this. But he also, at the very beginning, has put himself, and I will quote, how he would lead this effort and how he would lead the nation through the war. And he said, I would never want Ukraine to be a piece on the map, on the chessboard of big global players, or that someone could toss us around, use us as a cover, or part of some bargain. I want Ukraine to have an agency. And it was a very important statement, because understanding of agency actually caused fundamental changes, not only in the behavior of government officials, but also of diplomats, because this is how we approached everything. And I would like to note or point a couple of things that we have to do differently. And one would be, the first one would be to be more persistent. Something that, whether we are talking about negotiations, about the supplemental budgets, or weapons, or sanctions, or anything that we have been discussing during this time, if you look back into the public communication, the first answer to pretty much everything would be no. Even from our strategic friends, even from countries like I'm honored to represent Ukraine in the United States, and the country that realized and understood from the very beginning why this fight is important for all of us. But still, you know, everything from moving to HIMARSs and then to Patriots and everything else, the first answer was no. And in a classic diplomacy, you would take that no and you will try to work with it. But of course, for us, persistence became a matter of national survival. I couldn't afford to accept no. Nobody could afford to accept no. So we had to be persistent until that no turned to maybe, and then maybe turned to yes. So that persistence, sometimes bordering with very undiplomatic behavior, I would say, became a very important element of this wartime diplomacy. We also had to become tougher negotiators. You know, it doesn't mean that we have to be rude or violate diplomatic protocol, but especially during the closed doors, behind closed doors, in friendly negotiations, we no longer try to hide truths behind long and eloquent discussions or diplomatic sentences, because frankly, we cannot allow ourselves to have a plan B. This is genocidal war against Ukraine. Putin and Russians have been very clear since the day one, and even before that, in all the articles that war criminal Putin published before 2021 and in 2021, that it's about destruction of whole Ukraine. So, you know, it was clear to us that we have to be very clear and very direct. Also, classic diplomacy, and Ambassador has vast experience in that. But classic diplomacy, every time you cannot reach something, you have an exit strategy. You have a way to retreat if the initiative falls, and then, you know, try another attempt, or maybe even leave that for some time. But that, again, something that we could never afford, because for us, plan A is the only plan A, and there is no exit strategy. If you cannot reach success in something that you initiate, then you have to initiate it again, and next day sometimes. So that also led to another element of our diplomacy now, which is time. The quick decision making is something that we brought to the diplomatic world now. And if you look at all the new formats that we have initiated, and the speed with which Ukraine submitted application into European Union, and actually worked with our partners and going through the reforms at a faster pace than during the peaceful times. The quick decisions on different forums like Bucha Summit or the Peace Formula Summit or any other gatherings, which usually takes months, if not years, on the global arena to discuss. We had to do it in months, sometimes in weeks, sometimes in days. Sometimes we have to, again, break some rules in order to get our partners to understand that time is of the essence, that our lives and lives of our people depends on it. So also the communication style. I mean, the way our president communicated since day one, the way our foreign minister and everyone else back home communicated is definitely different from traditional communication of diplomats or government officials. We started talking directly to people, not just to our counterparts in the government. We also started not only communicating to people, but explaining to ordinary people in the United States, for example, why this matters to them. We had to explain to not only to people who understand why this fight is important, but to everyone. Why does it matter to a farmer in Minnesota? Why does it matter to a person living in Texas or regardless of the profession, anywhere in the United States, to support Ukraine in this fight? Why the worker in Pennsylvania should care that whether we stop Russia or not? And it's totally different communication. It's more open, it's more direct, it's pretty much everywhere. So I would really urge everyone, especially students who are listening to us, to take a look at the new website. It's called the Wartime Diplomacy, which is launched by the Foreign Minister of Ukraine. We launched it as early as February 24th. We put a lot of information there, which actually is really interesting to analyze. And it talks about the achievements and what we were able to achieve during this full-scale aggression. So in short, I mean, we had to learn how not to accept the word impossible and try to do everything possible and impossible to turn that word into yes. Now, as you rightfully said, the creativity in approaches, the recovery platform, because Russians are destroying everything, the energy coordination platform, the Ramstein meeting, which, you know, tomorrow we will have the second year anniversary of the Ukrainian Defense Contact Group, which was initiated by Secretary Austin and our Minister of Defense, and now it became a monthly gathering of more than 50 countries discussing how they can help us on the battlefield. And it's frankly, as I remember, even since my finance minister days, is the only super effective format of international cooperation, which is not even a properly created institution. It's just getting together of the defense ministers and chief of staffs. But what I want to close with is about some very important element of this war, which I think is unique to Ukraine wartime diplomacy, and it's the authenticity as the key element of our diplomatic leadership and everything we do. because we fight for what we truly believe in. We fight for the values of and principles of democracy, human dignity, freedom, independence. So we fight for our homes and our loved ones. This fight is very personal to all of us because every Ukrainian diplomat has a family back home. Every Ukrainian diplomat has someone who is either on the front line or lived or lives under occupation still. So we don't need to use, tricks or some creative initiatives, or we don't need to use propaganda or some double standards to convince people. We are doing it with very open hearts and open minds, and authenticity of that is very important element. So now, as we fight for 792 days now in this full-fledged phase of the war, as today, I'm very glad that we are talking after Congress approved and President signed, and we're again discussing the packages of support. And it's very important that America is back. It's important for us. It's important for Europe. It's important for Indo-Pacific region. It's important for Americans, because the outcome of this war will define the world in which all of us will be living after this. And we all together have to win. And that's why I believe it's not just Ukrainian diplomats or American diplomats. It's all people who have to join this fight one way or another. And we're not asking Americans to be on the battlefield, but we have to join this fight for what is right, for truth, for light here in the United States, and win together. Sorry for my a bit long introductory notes, but I would be more than happy to discuss it in Q&A section. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, for those very excellent comments. I would like to just pick up on 2 points that you made. You spoke about President Zelensky. I think a lot of credit has to go to President Zelensky in terms of how he's portrayed the fight of the Ukrainian people to the outside world. I think he's been a very important element of Ukraine's success in terms of its diplomacy, not to take anything away from the diplomats, obviously, but President Zelensky has been a key element in articulating Ukraine's struggle. And I think it was very good that you highlighted that. The other thing is, you spoke about the time is very important, how diplomacy shortens everything in terms of cooperation. Unfortunately, it's a good example, but unfortunately, it had to be during a wartime that Ukraine is suffering from. But NATO has been strengthened and expanded, and Ukraine has played a key role in that. So Ukraine has shown its true colors in terms of leaning toward the West and working with the West. So I just want to emphasize those 2 points. Thank you once again. I'll turn to Bob now for his opening comments, and then we'll turn to some questions from the audience. Bob?
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for your remarks, Ambassador. So a couple of broad things. One, the title being the role of the ambassador in time of war. And I think the ambassador actually hit on something that's very important, which is if you wait till there's an existential threat, if you wait till there is a conflict, it's too late. If the ambassador and her predecessors were not making the contacts that they need to make, not working with the community, if you wait till there's the existential threat, it's too late to build the relationships which matter, and it's very, very important. And I come to this from several different angles. As Jonathan pointed out in my introduction, I work for the law firm of Eckert Siemens. We represent, for example, the Ukrainian Catholic Church in Philadelphia. We've worked with many of the refugees, and so we see on that end the direct result of the pressures of war. I, of course, also come to it from the lens of a former Army officer as a judge advocate, and that lens creates a look for our modern conflicts of the Army always being, in today's modern conflicts, very close with the Department of State and the diplomatic corps, looking at, as was mentioned, the war, and looking at through the lens of the international humanitarian law, the law of war, and whether or not war crimes exists. So that's the second lens that I look at this through. And the third is, having worked for a United States senator for 12 years, I think it's really important to understand that the personal relationship between an ambassador and members of Congress and members of the Senate is extremely important, no matter which country one is with. You know, the ambassador can't have a relationship with every single one, but certainly with the committees and the chairs that have the biggest say in foreign policy and appropriations, that type of thing, because policy is an important thing, but personality plays a huge role. And we've seen this in history when we look, you know, at the relationship, for example, between Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt. It was critical to Churchill that he make himself a friend of Roosevelt, so that Roosevelt wouldn't abandon Britain in its time of need. The other part, when you're looking at from the role of a senator or a congressman, it's exactly as the ambassador pointed out. You've got to explain to that congressman from Michigan not only why this is important for humanity, not only why it's important for the people in Ukraine, but why is it important in his district in Michigan? Because that is ultimately their first worldview. And I think it's also important for a diplomat, certainly not necessarily the ambassador herself in Washington, but through the use of the honorary consuls, through the use of other spokespeople, to have a relationship with that senator or that congressman's state staff, if at all possible. I think that's very, very important. From my own observation, I have seen that in the 12 years that I was with Senator Toomey very extensively, for example, with the Taiwanese. Why? Well, they've been with an existential threat for a very, very long time. And they know if they don't build those relations, when, so to speak, the balloon goes up, that there's a big loss. And certainly your honorary consul, Manor, in Philadelphia, has been a good person with that outreach. And the last thing from the lens of someone having worked in the Senate is that you have to play ultimately for the long game. You have to be looking at what is the most important, critical, long thing, as the ambassador pointed out, to keep pushing for and keep getting back on track. I think it's really important, if you're looking at the role of the ambassador, for that person to understand the culture of the people that you're dealing with in Congress and the American people. There's an old saying in strategy that culture eats strategy for lunch. That simply, if you argue, you know, if you, the facts and whatever in a way that doesn't address the culture of the people involved, that you're at a great disadvantage. And I would end with the time is of the essence part that the ambassador you know, pointed out. This is critical. It's critical to understand. It's critical how the culture works in that, because whether we like it or we don't like it, the government of the United States is a very large, very lumbering bureaucracy. And when you look at what it took to get this last aid package for Ukraine through, it wasn't about whether or not, per se, the United States should aid Ukraine. It was about how to get the other pieces out of the pie. And that's a part of the way in which the bureaucracy works. So I would, you know, just emphasize that personal role, that role of understanding the culture is absolutely critical. And then the time of the essence part comes when you have an existential threat like war, where all of a sudden is heightened.
Thank you very much for those very enlightening comments. I couldn't agree with you more that personal relationships with congressional members as well as with the executive branch of the government is very, very important for the success of any embassy and ambassador in terms of their duties in country. So I'm glad you brought that to the attention of our audience. We're going to have time for a few questions now, but I'm going to take the privilege of being the moderator to ask the first question. It's kind of a dual question. And I don't know if this will go to you, Bob, or to the ambassador, but I'll just put it out. Maybe each of you could respond to it. There are two issues that are currently facing the U.S. Government. One is the issue of the frozen assets of the Russian government, what to do with them and how to utilize them. If you heard in Congress, there was some discussion about using those assets as part of the payment for Ukraine. The other issue is one that I had spoken to, and I believe the ambassador mentioned briefly, is the issue, or that you, Bob, may have mentioned about war crimes. I know that the Ukrainian government obviously is looking at that situation as well as the U.S. government. Is there anything that either of you can give us as an update for the audience to have more information as to what the status of those examinations are and how you see them maybe moving forward?
I'd like to do a very brief part and then pass it over to the ambassador.
Would be happy to.
So from my perspective, and people don't generally like to hear this, but from my perspective, the war crimes part is a tool that the ambassador can use, which addresses the culture of the United States to show why it's so important to support Ukraine. Because the reality is, even if under the law of war, we prove war crimes, you then have to get the person. The likelihood that we are going to try someone like Vladimir Putin is exceedingly small. But proving war crimes in the theater of public opinion is critical. So I would just want to address that broadly and then turn it over to the ambassador to this.
Thank you. Let me start by first the frozen assets. And together with this supplementary package, which has been adopted, there is a second draft law, which actually was turned into the law, which is called and has a very telling name, the Peace Through Strengths, which again is one of my favorite President Reagan's quotes. Inside of that law, there is a whole separate draft law, which was called Repo Act, which actually gives authority to the president to confiscate the Russian assets and provide them to Ukraine Support Fund, then to be used for reparations and reconstructions, which is very important. You already mentioned, Ambassador, that the World Bank, which is doing an independent third-party evaluation of what is destructed in Ukraine, and they already did twice this assessment, which is called the Rapid Damage Assessment Report. The last one, as of February 2024, estimated just a physical damage. It's not about the results of the dam destruction or life lost or the businesses destroyed. It's just physical damage of the buildings. We are already at $486 billion US. There is approximately 300 billion of Russian sovereign assets which are frozen or immobilized everywhere in Europe, in other countries, including the United States. Of course, the part in the US is not the largest one, but I think it's very important that Congress has been very specific by saying it has to be confiscated. It has to be given to Ukraine. It's not just the money for rebuilding, but it's also justice. It's an issue of justice that aggressor that destroyed it have to pay. Now, moving to a justice issue, it's a more complex issue, and I think is inseparable issue of the fight for peace now, the fight in this war, because when there's Russian criminals who are attacking Ukraine, when they know that there will be justice, that their last names are not going to be forgotten. It's not the orders they're taken from someone. It's actually individual responsibility. It will help now during the wartime. and maybe we'll stop some people from some actions. But also it's a very important notion for Ukrainians to know that justice will be served to those who are killed and tortured and raped in Bucha, in Mariupol, and so many other places, even if it's not something that is going to be done today, but it will be done. But also justice is a very important concept in order to restore international order, which was violated by Russia, and to deter other aggressors. So what are we doing there? I mean, the short answer would be everything. And we work very actively with Department of Justice and Department of State on those areas. And they're helping us a lot with investigation, you know, and all other phases. But we have more than 140,000 individual war crime cases in Ukraine already, which are being investigated and even heard by Ukrainian court system. Those are well prepared cases because we have so much evidence. We also have more than 14 countries, if I'm not mistaken, who open their own criminal investigations, and we are supplying them, we're sharing a lot of information, supplying them with that information so that they actually can prosecute Russians outside of Ukraine as well, which also is very important because the fact that justice has to be everywhere. There should be no place on earth where they could actually hide from the prosecutors and from justice. We engaged all major international courts, and we have cases in both International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court, and European Court of Human Rights. And ICC is one of the courts which actually moved further than others. And as you know, Putin and Lvova Belova, his so-called ombudsman on children's issues, are already indicted criminals. There is global arrest warrant for them for the most horrific crime of all, the abduction of Ukrainian children, which is part of the genocide. So not only they're killing us now everywhere in our peaceful cities and our brave defenders on the front line, not only they started the aggression, not only they're doing these war crimes and destroying the heritage sites, which already we talked about a little bit, destroying our past, trying to destroy our identity, but they are also trying to kill our future, or to steal our future from us by kidnapping, abducting our children and trying to either indoctrinate them, or if they're babies, put them for speedy adoptions into Russian families. So that all is a clear evidence of a genocide. Now, one very important element of justice is the crime of aggression. The crime of aggression is the mother of all crimes. The fact that they decided to start a war and start this aggression has to be punished. And as you know, we work really hard on the tribunal for the crime of aggression. And I would say, even though we're still debating the modality of that tribunal, it's a big step forward that US not only supported the tribunal itself, but also sent prosecutors to The Hague, where we have the office which our prosecutor general and other countries that participate in this effort delegated their people to actively work on it on a daily basis. So, you know, justice is a very important element of that. It's an inseparable part of President Zelensky's peace formula. One of the key top 10 elements is justice. And we see increased number of countries that are joining that particular element of the peace formula. We'll see how many will discuss it in the Peace Formula Summit this summer. But it's important because everyone understands it's also about them. Because we're answering question now about sovereignty of Ukraine, but also sovereignty of everyone. If our borders could be violated, so will other borders. We're talking about territorial integrity, and then we're testing the concept for all of us. Whether we will be able to defend Ukraine and push Russia out and restore our territorial integrity, or then anyone's territorial integrity is actually not as sacred as we thought. And about everything else, energy security, nuclear security, kids, you know, environmental safety. So justice is inseparable. There will be no just and lasting peace without justice to be served.
Madam Ambassador, thank you very much for that very, very detailed response. I think our audience probably found it very informative. I know we have some time left, I gather, Jonathan, and so we have some time for a few questions.
We do.
Do we have questions?
We have a couple that are in the queue online, but we also have an audience here with us. So why don't we start with those who are present with us, and our Vice President for Marketing Communications, Kelly Pfeiffer, she's also helping to coordinate in the background here. So she'll help us with reading the questions online that she helps select for you. So do we have
Yeah,
any?
I've got one question here, if I could read it. It's for the ambassador.
Yeah, okay.
And it says, what is the most important thing American teenagers and high school students should know about Ukraine and the war? I am a high school teacher who is working hard to impress upon my students why it is so important to support Ukraine. What is your message to them? This is by Daniel Steiber.
Thank you. First, that we are no different from the Americans. We just, peaceful people, very entrepreneurial, love our land, just wanted to live peacefully in our own country, elect our officials and change them on a regular basis. And the last thing we wanted is actually to fight and die and do what Ukrainian people, including teenagers, have to do now on a daily basis. But when your home is attacked and when there is no way you can live freely, then we all go back to the ideals of this country. And in high school, you learn American history, fight or live freely or die fighting. There is no other way, and you have to fight for these values during the peaceful time, and you have to prepare yourself. So I think what I want to explain is how similar we are. We are not different from Americans at all, and it's very easy to imagine why this fight has to be won, because you can just reflect it on yourself. If somebody would, God forbid, come and attack your home, you would do the same. But also to understand the implications if Russia will do what they want to do and completely occupy Ukraine, which of course we cannot allow that to happen. They will not stop in Ukraine. It's so much 1939 moment, and we have to learn the lessons from the history. We are approaching D-Day soon. Read about that. We don't want American boys and girls to fight for Poland or Baltic states, but Putin is very clear. He wants to recreate empire, and he wants to destroy the global order. And one thing, every time I see American students, especially school students here at the embassy, I always tell them, read more. Don't skip the physical education. If you can join the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, please do that. Because unfortunately, again, we all hoped you will never have to use this. But the world is a more dangerous place now. And when our kids had to live under occupation, in my hometown for 33 days, in some like Mariupol, they still under occupation, in Kherson for more than a year, knowing how to cook your food, knowing how to stay alive, knowing how to walk like some of our teenagers who walked for days from the occupied territories to reach, is a very good skill to have. And again, we all pray and hope that you will never have to use it. But you have to train yourself and be ready. And it's very important. And read about history. Unfortunately, it's the unlearned lessons from the past that keeps coming back over and over again. It was so clear when Putin was elected, everything that he has done. He has always been very consistent in his threats to all the free nations. So we have to. Yeah.
If I could just.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Bob, is there anything you want to add?
If I could just very briefly add to that, and it goes back to the mentioning of culture and understanding the culture. And it is a problem that an ambassador has, especially in a situation like that, which is that Americans in general know next to nothing of their own history. They certainly do not know anything about the Holodomor. They certainly have long forgotten what the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was like for those who were trapped in it. And so that emphasis on history is very important, because you can't assume when you're talking to them that they know anything about this at all, that they know what living under the Soviet Union was like for people in the Ukraine. So I think you can't underestimate enough the need to have that time to explain some history.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Ambassador. Jonathan, I don't know if there are any other questions in the queue. Does Roman have a question, or do you?
I'm hoping that the audience will
We have
take
an-
questions over me.
Yeah, so why don't you can stand up if you like, but just speak loud so you get into one of our speakers here.
First of all, I want to thank you for all your service and support for the people of Ukraine. And I was wondering, when Ukraine wins this war, what will you do from a post-war diplomatic perspective to prevent Russia from attacking Ukraine in the future?
Thank you. Well, when we win the war, we will have to win the peace. And this is going to be a task which is going to be not easier than winning the war. We will have to rebuild. We will have to build the resilience. We, will have to, Russia is not going to move anywhere. So that's why Ukraine is working so hard, not only to become member of the European Union, but member of NATO too. The era of gray zones and buffer zones is in the past. You're either part of the civilized free world, or you will be under risk of attack and occupation. And we understand that we will be the front line of democracy. And our battle-tested army, which is the largest and the most, that's not something we have chosen, but it's a battle-tested, the strongest army, will be an asset for all NATO countries, and will be able to defend all of us together. But the main point for us, and it's the light at the end of the tunnel, is that this reconstruction of Ukraine, we want to move and leapfrog into Ukraine 2.0 in every sector, in agriculture, energy, to be the most innovative, the most the fastest growing economy, and to be the answer to so many global challenges that Russia created for all of us, because we can feed the world together with the United States. We can do a lot in energy. We can do a lot in digitalization and IT and chips and all that, because we cannot rely upon the former supply chains which are weaponized, but not only Russia, but other countries as well. So this is something that we think about. This is something that is very inspirational for all of us. And this is where Ukraine plans to work really hard in order to be a reliable strategic friend for the United States for many, many years and centuries going forward.
Any other questions from the audience there, Roman?
Do we have any others here in the room? Yes, why don't you come on up and sit in the chair right here so you're close to the speaker.
Hi, sir. My name's Danilo Rudakevich. I'm also a former retired U.S. Army soldier. Thank you for your service. To the fellow that is in the Army or was in the Army.
Oh.
My question is, there was some mention about propaganda, and Russia seems to have upped its propaganda game lately to the point where it's even infiltrating our own Congress. I mean, they're spewing the same lines that are being spewed in Russia for the last 10, 15 years, that the Ukrainians are degenerates, that we're Nazis, that NATO is the ones that aggressed. And they see this, Russia sees this as a war of defending themselves. But the average Russian sees it that way because of that propaganda. What's being done to counter that? And what can diplomacy do about that?
Thank you.
Thank you for very important question, because Russian propaganda first is based on centuries of propaganda before, whether it was done by Russian Empire or Soviet Union or modern Russia. and a number of countries outside of our region, but even in our region, looked at our region through the lenses of Russian propaganda. Russia always mattered, all other countries didn't. The majority of people still do not know how many nations are still captive inside Russia. And it affected everyone from academia to theater and science and so many. So they're not just doing it now, but they're basing it on a very long propaganda before. Now, of course, now their propaganda is part of the war effort. And we see how this disinformation campaigns, misinformation campaigns, pure propaganda is actually coming together with offensives on the ground or something like this. And we won round one in 2022 because we had so many journalists on the front line, because Ukraine was on 24/7, you know, as the breaking news, and people could see actually, you know, because truth is our best instrument, but it's no longer the case. I mean, Ukraine is not on TV, at least in the United States, all the time. So what do we do now? First, of course, is getting the information out and trying to spread the information about the battlefield and how it is to as many people as possible, just spreading the truth. Second is, you know, talking to all the audiences, not just the traditional audience for diplomacy. That's why, for example, I travel more this year and last year than in 2022. I just returned from Utah. Before that, I was in Kansas City. We went with Prime Minister during his visit to Chicago, Illinois. Before that, I went to Minnesota, and I will travel more and more and more in order to talk to people and try to explain and tell them what we're doing. And we have more people traveling from Ukraine, not to Washington, but to other areas and states. Second, it's very important. That's why this event is so important. What academia is doing, universities, colleges, you know, talking about it, talking about Holodomor, explaining that it's not something Russia did now, it's what Russia did 90 years ago, and talking about 1708 and the Battle of Poltava, where Ukraine lost together with Sweden and Finland, which then led to occupation of our countries for such a long time, and only us becoming independent in 1918, which always a big surprise when I say here that Ukraine was independent in 1918. Yes, we became independent with Finland and with other countries, but then was occupied by the Soviet Union. So, you know, spreading the information, talking in every aspect, not allowing Russia to use the propaganda. By the way, recently, the Russian ballerinas tried to join a performance in New York, and not only Ukrainian community, but also the New York Assembly said, no, we cannot allow the ballerinas from the state troop, which is led by Putin supporter, and they all are supporting Putin effort very publicly. We cannot allow them to be. That's why we are fighting against participation of Russian sportsmen from Russia and Belarus in Olympics. So every effort matters. And it's a very complex task, and it cannot be done by diplomats alone, or by President Zelensky, or by armed forces of Ukraine. This is a task for all of us. And we need to do it not only for Ukraine to spread the truth, but also for all of us to understand what we're dealing with. Because unless we clearly understand that this is a threat and what is the true intent of Russia and why they're doing it, we will not be able to combat it and deter others who have the same agenda in other parts of the world. So it's a very complex issue, and I want to thank again Manor College for not only doing this very important discussion today, but also the Ukrainian Refugee Scholarship that you have. You know, because this exchange of information, the students talking to students, the professors talking to professors, or your project Resilience, which actually gets and digitalizes materials of significant historic and cultural value to Ukraine, but spreading it here, sharing with others, because our culture is inseparable part of global culture. It's very important to continue doing that and try to get as many universities to have Ukrainian studies, to open them, to study this, because lessons from this war are very important for all of us. So it will take a village, as you say, you know, you say it takes a village to raise a child. It will take a village to combat this propaganda and spread the truth.
Thank you very much,
Stated,
Ambassador.
very well stated, Ambassador. I want to thank our panelists. Jonathan, I think we've run out of time, so I'd like to thank our panelists for their very, very informative presentations. Oksana, Bob, it was good seeing you. I wish you all the best and continued success, and I'd like to turn it over to you now, Jonathan, for concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Roman. So I wanted to thank all of you, thank all of our panelists very much. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you, and God bless you all.
We thank our marketing office, Kelly Pfeiffer, Anthony Machinsky, Allison Myers, and our advancement office, Tom Sims, our IT office, Ilya, who's right in the corner here helping us with support, for all of your collective support for today's program. As a teaser for the fall, please look out for our 17th program. We're working together to gather the voices of U.S. congressmen and women who have personally visited Ukraine. So please keep all of our work, please keep Ukraine, the Middle East, areas of conflict, Manor College, all of it in your prayers. So thank you, and God bless you. Thank you all.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Take care, everyone.
Salve Ukraini.
Have a good evening.
Героям слава!
Героям